love, I think, has such a strong power. And I think there's a lot of love on these streets today.
All races, creeds, colors, genders, and ages, raising their voices in massive demonstrations, the marches both breaking barriers and mending fences. It's been a week for the history books.
A groundswell that started with anger over the death of a black man in police custody has now grown into a movement, and a discussion of police brutality is now a conversation about so much more that needs to change.
Fox 11 News In Depth is joining with Christine Devine's Race Matters week-long special project to bring you the voices who can help us find our way forward in a society that is changing right before our eyes. We begin right now. Hello, everyone. I'm Hal Eisner, along with Christine Devine, and welcome to a slightly different take on In Depth this week.
Thank you, Hal, for helping put a spotlight on a series we've been hosting all week called Race Matters.
You're watching Fox 11 News, Race Matters.
You Ben! This is something we've been talking about for years. It ain't a trend.
A special week-long series with host Christine Devine.
Christine, Race Matters has been airing weeknights at 6 p.m., and you've had some very important perspectives presented on both the things that unite us and those things that divide us. Tell us a little about one of your stories.
Well, we had one really great guest this week, the director of a brand new department in Los Angeles. Capri Maddox is heading up the Department of Civil and Human Rights. Now, this idea came in February. It's just now launching, though. We saw you standing there with the mayor. You spoke as well about the department. What is the goal of the department?
The goal of the department is to address discrimination and systemic racism against people of color and disenfranchised communities in our Los Angeles region. You know that majority of people in the city of color are people of color, and although that adds to our diversity, and it's beautiful, but compared to white Americans, our Caucasian brothers and sisters, they experience more discrimination in housing, education, employment, and commerce, and those are the 4 areas that our department will address.
And what do you plan to tackle right away?
All right. So this is something that has been accelerated. We're very grateful for the mayor and city council for moving things forward for our department to open. But you should know that the number 1 and number 2 crisis in America, one is related to health disparities as it relates to the COVID crisis.
Capri's focus very much about the healthcare crisis with an emphasis on underserved communities of color and the disparities already there.
What do you think are some of the other racial disparities that need to be addressed?
I addressed this right away. Jobs, inclusivity. Think about this, how we saw this already in Hollywood. Education. Think of the COVID crisis we've been talking about. Kids learning at home and disparities there.
We've all seen the images on TV of those big crowds out on the streets, but on a personal level, what does all of this mean? You had a little something on that as well, didn't you?
I really love this story. I asked an African-American mother for perspective. Mary and Arthur Cates adopted 3 children. They're now 19, 20, and 26. She worries about how they're dealing with things.
So when all of this erupted, I thought about, oh my God, where is he? What's he doing? Is he protesting? Is he looting? Is he rioting? Knowing that, I just could imagine this stirred up some anger in him. And reaching out to him and talking to him, I found that he chose not to protest, but to go to work, come home, and just digest this within the confines of his home and just reflect.
What if he had chosen to protest?
The pain from being followed in the street, stomped in the street unjustly, that pain is still there and it's deeply rooted. So because of that, for him, I would say, don't do it. Stay home.
And remember how for her children, they were all adopted. So many of their first encounters with police was as little children, and that pain that comes with that.
You know, I have to ask you, as you're talking to people, the voices of the community, that mother, what kinds of things are you thinking about? Well, what's sort of on a personal level for you?
I have called everybody, friends of all races, ages, ethnicities. And what I've found is that people are processing this through their own lens. Your history is different from my history, different from my godson who grew up in Inglewood. I mean, our lens from how we're viewing this is very different, but every home in America is talking about this. And what I'm encouraged by is you see the young people stepping up to be involved, to listen, to protest, to engage, to think about matters. And I really think that these young people are changing America. It's going to be a different America as we move forward.
I think you're absolutely right. Coming up next on Fox 11 News in Depth, we're joined by USC law professor Jody Armour to talk about the conflict we've been seeing and whether we're making any progress in closing the racial divide. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Fox 11 News in Depth. I'm Hal Eisner along with Christine Devine. For some time now, protests have rolled through Los Angeles and cities across the country.
Some peaceful and hopeful, but some angry and violent. The mood on the streets unpredictable and evolving daily, it seems, right?
Yeah, that's certainly true. And for those of us who have been in this city a number of years, also not unprecedented. Long before many of these protesters were even born, there were those in the black community who also took to the streets. In 1965, frustration over police mistreatment and discrimination in housing and unemployment led to the Watts riots.
It's a feeling that you are nothing. Nothing. That's why you feel nothing, and half the time they call you nothing here.
Alice Harris, known by many as Sweet Alice, was 30 at the time. She says she was a protester, but set out to make change by trying to help young people get jobs and a good education.
We're not where we should be, but we sure in the hell ain't where we used to be.
Though generations change, she says the feelings of inequity never did, and saw this week's protest triggered by the death of George Floyd as a trigger to reignite the long-standing feeling of inequality. In fact, that video of Floyd dying under the knee of a Minneapolis police officer was painful to her. It was also painful to LA City Councilman Herb Wesson.
I don't have the words to describe how upset I was when I saw that video.
Both Wesson and Harris want to take something bad and turn it into something good.
I am saddened by, we're in a virus, we're in a pandemic, by the loss of life of Mr. Floyd, and I could rattle off another 20 names. This could be our moment. This could be our time. Let us rise up and take advantage of it.
We've been hearing from a number of voices that this great upheaval might bring about lasting change. Joining us now live is USC law professor Jody Armour, who studies race and criminal justice at USC.
And Jody, good to see you. Thanks for joining us. First of all, you heard Sweet Alice, you heard Herb Wesson. But what do you think about some of what you just heard?
Good to be with you, Hal and Christine. And yes, it seems that we're stuck in a kind of racial injustice Groundhog Day. We keep waking up to the same set of issues, persistent and pervasive issues. And often what we do is when we have an incident like this, it's a wash, rinse, and repeat cycle. We'll convene a commission, we'll have a town hall hearing, people will come and vent, then the policymakers will step in and say, oh, we have a fix, body cameras. Here's another fix, implicit bias training. How about community policing? How about de-escalation training? Minneapolis Police Department had all of that, and we still had this incident arise, not only with the one officer with his knee on the neck of George Floyd, but the three others who stood by and didn't intervene. So I think we're finally getting to the place, Hal, in which we're saying it's more than a technological fix that's going to take to solve this problem, more than cosmetic fixes. We got to get down to the deeper structural racism and deal with that.
You know, as you saw these protests, you saw so many young people and faces of all colors, all ethnicities. What kind of America do you think that the youth are calling for?
The America the youth are calling for is the one that we had prayed for from the beginning of this country, right? Born in liberty, democracy. The idea was, equality and justice for all, out of many, one, de pluribus unum. But at that very moment of the inception of the nation, we had our original sin because, people like Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, our founders, also owned slaves. So slavery was our original sin. We tried to deal with it with a civil war, a cataclysmic race war, 600,000 dead Americans. But then we went into segregation, kind of racial apartheid, Jim Crow. And now when you walk down the street here in our own LA, down Skid Row, which is probably the largest, homelessness place in the country, the fiercest expression of structural violence in the country, it's 75% black. right? So we still haven't dealt with those deeper issues. And once we deal with those, and these young people are saying, we're ready to deal with those issues now. We're ready to talk about how we deal with those issues, and that's a hopeful sign.
That's probably painted best by the images we just saw, because first we saw images from the Watts riots, then we saw images from rioting or protesting, actually, peaceful protesting from the last couple of weeks. The ones we have out on the streets today weren't around when the Watts riot happened in many cases. And so that speaks to the ongoing generational issue here, doesn't it?
Yeah, a lot of them weren't even around, or were very young, rather, when Trayvon Martin, the case, George Zimmerman shot a 17-year-old Trayvon Martin and was acquitted by a jury, and that gave rise to the Black Lives Matter hashtag. A lot of these young people were like 9, 10, 11 years old, even back then. So they're coming of age at a time when they are in a position to look at the world with fresh and hopeful eyes, not the jaded eyes, not the, kind of somewhat pessimistic and fatalistic eyes of those who've seen this cycle repeat itself so many times. And, statements like defund the police, which doesn't mean abolish the police in any thoughtful way. What it means is just let's divert some of those resources towards social services, towards health care, towards schooling, so that we don't make police the saviors of our society, in the sense of they have to solve all our social problems, right? We can't make the jails the receptacles of our social failures and put the police in the middle of everything, which isn't a job that they're suited for. They want to do what they do best: solve homicides, solve rape, not become street level social workers. And I think we're finally figuring out how to do that, or at least that we have to do that.
Okay. All right. Very good. We're going to talk more about the police coming up. Christine and I will be back with Jody Armour on the other side of this break. We'll see you then. We're back with USC Law Jody Armour, Christine Devine, and I talking about Race Matters. We've talked a lot about the Black community's relationship with the police and the crisis created by the deaths of Black people at the hands of officers.
This week on our special segments called Race Matters, I spoke to the co-founder of Black Lives Matter, as well as LAPD Chief Michael Moore, about the call to defund the police.
We share the common bond, which is to ensure public safety all throughout Los Angeles, and that is a police department that is properly staffed and has the time and resources to invest in the very community building, trust building exercises and philosophies that we've become noted for.
Police claim that they need this budget, this massive budget, because they're doing things that they have no business or expertise doing. What they say is the reason that they need so much money is because they're serving as social workers and drug rehabilitation counselors and EMT officials, right? EMT workers. We say put that money in real social workers.
Jody Armour, what's your thought on that?
Yeah, public safety is something we all want. And the question is, how do we achieve the most public safety? Do we do it through deterrence, putting armed officers to scare people away from doing crime? Or do we do it on the front end by providing jobs and making it so that people aren't hungry and so that they aren't homeless, so that they aren't tempted to do crime? If you engage in crime prevention, you don't need crime deterrence, and we're all safer. And I think that's what we're finally starting to recognize. We need good policing when we do have breakdowns, homicides, rapes, etc. But we don't need police to be social workers at the street level or solve all these other kinds of social problems.
I've got a question about policing itself. So what happens when an officer has to make a split-second decision? Are you still going to have incidents that are concerning to the public?
Oh, yeah. We have embedded in our unconscious a lot of stereotypes that are mental habits. And there are a number of experiments that suggest that if ordinary people see a Black person and a white person who's ambiguous, they see a person who's Black and ambiguous as more threatening than a similarly situated white person. It happens at the level of the unconscious, even if you're racially liberal. So, stereotypes are kind of a public health problem. They're not just things that bad people do. We all are subject to stereotypes. And so that is going to be a continuous problem. And we're going to have to try to minimize those situations in which officers feel that threatened and have to make those split-second decisions.
Let me ask you a second question, because I'm thinking how different a day makes, because just York. 4 months ago, February, I was in the inner city at a church honoring law enforcement for Black History Month. How do you view police?
Police are sadly often put in a very difficult position because we don't invest in things like enough housing, schooling, food, jobs, health care. We try to criminalize our way out of those problems and make jails the receptacles of our social failures. So they're put in a tough position. We need to just give them the jobs that they can perform well, when they can perform some jobs very well, and take from them the kind of tasks that our social workers and other people should be handling. So I think that it would be much fairer to them if they weren't just put in the middle of a lot of our social failures and have problems that they could really deal with.
So we hear a lot about this notion of defunding police departments, but the idea behind that is you take the money that you take from a police department, you put that into social programs, and it's like wellness. You help prevent problems so police don't have to go out and deal with those sort of things. You buy that?
Yeah, the idea behind defunding is just diverting some of the resources, a good number of the resources, to crime prevention, rather than broken windows policing. In the 80s and 90s, I'd had officers tell me if a Black person in South Central was jaywalk, spit on the sidewalk, they were down on the sidewalk with their hands behind their backs, because that's the kind of policing that we were engaging in, broken windows policing. In New York, we have them going after turnstile jumpers, stop and question and frisk. A lot of kind of proactive policing that generates a reservoir of resentment between community members and the police and doesn't actually make us safer. So I think it's absolutely right that we can start to think about policing in a much smarter way and reinvest some of those resources, many of those resources, in ways that won't generate the kind of antagonism between the police and community the way that we now sometimes do.
And where are you seeing change take place right now, already through this current crisis?
Right now, you saw the mayor of LA who said he was going to divert funds from the police department. He had, for the unrestricted funds of $5.5 billion, he had almost 54% of that going to the LAPD. He said, I'm going to take some of that funds up to $150 million and direct that toward things like housing, like healthcare, like crime prevention that will make us all safer at the front end rather than dealing with it at the back end. So it's having a real impact even right now.
And I think a lot of people don't really understand this $150 million because it's really only about 5 to 7% of the $1.8 billion budget that the LAPD gets. So when you talk about that, a lot of people, and especially on social media, you see them having real debates about what's going to happen to our law enforcement. Fact of the matter is, we're not talking about a big chunk of that money. We're talking about a chunk of that money that could have a big impact. The police union would say, well, that means we won't have more promotions. We won't have, fast response times. I don't think we know any of that at this point.
Right, we don't. And yeah, I absolutely agree with it, Hal. It's just a fraction of a very large budget. And we do know, for example, in 2006, we had the Safer Cities Initiative, in which we decided we were going to solve the homelessness problem with police. We were going to put all these extra police in Skid Row and crack down on the down and out in the name of therapeutic policing and make them go to these mega shelters and 12-step programs because they saw the problem not as a lack of jobs and opportunities, but as internal deficiencies, broken people. It didn't work. It just didn't work, and it generated a lot of unnecessary animosity between community people and the police. So we can divert some of those resources, make ourselves safer, and still have a police department that will respond when we call 911. And we all know that that's what we want.
That's the big question people have, I think, right?
USC, thank you so much. We're going to have to actually wrap this segment because we have to move on to the next one. We'll be back right after this break. Don't go away. Welcome back to Fox 11 News in Depth. Christina, such an important subject. Your thoughts about these last few historic weeks?
Actually, I'm thinking about moving forward, looking ahead. It's going to be a discussion we'll be having for some time. Remember, the community is looking forward to a trial in the death of George Floyd. So a lot of conversations still to be had in what I call a changed America.
No question about that. I know in all my years it's been interesting to see so many people from so many diverse walks of life walking out there on the streets, getting the message out there. Young people, older folks. It's really quite a large voice out there, and it's going to be important that we keep this conversation continuing. An emotional conversation, emotional couple of weeks, a message full of passion, energy, and change.
In that spirit, we teamed up with Fred Martin's Compton Kids Club, performing their original song, Stand Up, featuring some powerful moments that unfolded right here on Fox 11.
Bye-bye.
Cry when the lights go down, terrified that your time's run out, wondering, will the tables turn in a fight that you know isn't fair, but no one in the world seems to care, reaching out, but we let you down, 'cause we all know you really need someone there to keep an eye on you, someone that cares, should give a hand to you. You need someone to take a chance for you,
someone to stand up. Are you gonna stand up? Would you please? I need you to stand up when you know to. Don't just throw your hands up. Would you please? I'm on my knees and I beg you to stand up.
We gotta be that change, live to fight another day. Begging on our knees, we pray our brothers, sisters be okay. I picture a world with love, peace, prosperity, no justice, no peace. All I'm asking, do you ever cry when the lights go down? Terrified that your screams run out. Hold on, we can hear you now, and we all know you really need someone there to keep an eye on you, someone who cares to give a hand to you. You need someone to take a chance for you, someone to stand up. Are you gonna stand up? Would you please? Stand up. Oh, my knees and I beg you. Oh, even when it hurts you. Stand up. Oh, don't throw your hands up. Stand up. Oh, would you please? Stand up. Oh, I'm on my knees and I beg you to stand up. So many black kids steady fighting to survive. How can we save the world when we can't even save our lives? How can we use our voice when we get hurt to vote?